welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Shelley Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Lucy Scott to the show. Lucy graduated from Massey University in 2015 with a Bachelor of Veterinary Science and spent 6 years practicing as a mixed animal veterinarian, working with everything from sheep and cattle to cats and dogs. Not long after graduating, she went to a clinic on positive reinforcement in horses and started incorporating R+ in with her own horses and animals. This spread to consuming every piece of information she could read on animal behavior and training. In June this year, she gained a membership to the Australian and New Zealand College of Veterinary Scientists in the subject of veterinary behavior. Veterinary Behaviour Services New Zealand was born in September 2020, and Lucy is now working 2 days a week as a vet while building up the business in the Waikato, New Zealand. She isn't sure what hat she wears some days, behavior consultant, vet, or trainer, and that suits her well. Welcome, Lucy. It is my absolute pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you.
I am really excited for both of those things as well. So let's just jump right in and get started and let everybody, all of our listeners, get to know you a little bit better. Could you start us out today by sharing a little bit of your story with us? I would love to hear what led you to veterinary school to begin with and kind of how you decided to practice as a mixed animal veterinarian. And then I would love to hear also about how you're spending your days now.
So I grew up with many, many animals. I'm not quite sure how my mother managed really with all the animals and children, but I grew up in the UK and was sort of, as a kid with lots of animals, you're always like, yeah, I'm going to become a veterinarian. This was the dream. But found we moved around too much. My grades dropped a little. And then we decided to move halfway around the world to New Zealand. So we moved to New Zealand in 2007, I believe, something like that, 2007 or 2008. When I got here, I realized just up the road was a university where I could study veterinary science, and that there was an option for me to go there and study and then get into vet school. So that's what I did. I went and did 1 semester at Massey University doing basic science papers and got into the vet school that way. The rest was a bit of history. They were always recommended to do mixed practice when you first get out because New Zealand's about the only place that James Herriot veterinary work is still available, and it's good for a young vet to learn to do all of it. So I started in a dairy cattle area and was doing a lot of small animal desexing, but also some dairy work. And then we moved to Raglan, which is on the west coast of New Zealand, where it sort of expanded into sheep, cattle, cats, dogs, birds, small animals like rabbits and guinea pigs. It was a lot more mixed than I had been working with even previously. And I did that for 3 years. And then I got a concussion. I got kicked by a calf. In the meantime, I'd always been really interested in training behaviour. I went to that clinic that I mentioned that started me out on the positive reinforcement training myself. And I'd always thought about doing the qualification that I was looking at, the membership, but hadn't really felt like I could get out of doing the mixed practice role. Anyway, it took me 8 months to get back into this mixed practice role after being kicked by a calf, and realised that I didn't really like being there with the after hours and the stress of during the day. I couldn't really schedule my life the way I wanted to, and I couldn't really felt very out of control all of the time, which is funny because my days are still not scheduled as I'd like them, but they're my schedule, it makes a big difference. So I finished up doing mixed practice at the beginning of the year. I started Veterinary Behaviour Services last year, finished doing mixed role in January, and moved to part-time companion animal and studied until June. And since June, my focus has been on the business and growing the behaviour training consultancy side of things. Yeah, so my days now, when I'm not locuming, because I'm still doing 2 days a week as a veterinarian, which are chaotic, really busy, lots of smaller animal, cats and dogs. The rest of the week is focusing on, I do short training sessions, and I do behaviour consultations with really fearful or anxious or aggressive cats and dogs mostly at the moment. Which is really fun. I really like working with clients that are really committed to their animals and figuring out causes and changes and how they can set up their lives and their particular situation to manage a situation, and then to start bringing in some behaviour modification. Yeah, it's a really challenging but really satisfying role that I'm moving into. Yeah.
I wondered when I read your bio if you were, I had a feeling that as a small child, you were probably somebody who already knew that they wanted to be a veterinarian or work with animals in some way. So fun for me to hear that that feeling was right.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that I'm not familiar with, and I wonder if you could kind of tell us a little bit more about it. And you said something, I believe, about James Herriot vet work.
So James Herriot was a veterinarian in the era of World War II. He himself, James Herriot is a fictional character, but the guy who wrote the stories of James Herriot was a veterinarian himself. And he was a mixed practice veterinarian, who would carve cows and then come back in and do surgery on a dog. And it was a very famous series of books in England that was, that I've still got on the shelf actually behind me. Not that I bought them, my husband, who's also a veterinarian, was given them as a child. So interesting that,
I should probably know those books, but I did not. So thank you for sharing that. Are there things today that you miss about mixed animal practice, or are you just kind of completely glad to be done with it?
I really like my farmers. I really enjoyed working outside and the physical aspect of doing carving time. I liked being that little woman that turns up and is able to do a carving. That I really enjoyed that part of it. But I definitely don't miss the after hours work. That came with quite a lot of anxiety, to be quite honest. And there's definitely bits. I loved there's some most beautiful places around the west coast of New Zealand that I would never have seen if I hadn't been in a vet ute driving around the countryside. Some incredible farms. And I miss some of the large animal work because I liked the animals and I liked that sort of thing. But I like being outside, which I still am some days. So
I could totally imagine myself feeling similarly to what you just described. I am sure I would not like the after hours on call kind of way of living, but being outside and the physical work and all of that does sound appealing. So now that you have shifted and started doing a lot more behavior work, can you tell us a little bit about what the membership is? Membership with the Australian and New Zealand School of Veterinary Sciences, I believe it was. Did I get that right? Can you tell us a little bit about what that entails, what that is, and what you're learning there?
So it's an unusual qualification. So it's for veterinarians that have been graduated more than 4 years, and it's a completely self-directed learning experience. Essentially, they give you past exams and a list of objectives and a few recommended readings, and they go, off you go. And then we have 2 written exams and an oral exam. So it was very, like I say, self-directed learning. You were given a mentor who sort of gives you an idea of, yes, you're on the right track. Here are some resources. But essentially it's just a one-off examination, and then you enter into a membership of a chapter. And that membership sort of gives you the right to put the letters after your name. It's not a specialism, but you can then go on and do a fellowship into this chapter, and that gives you sort of the same level of a veterinary behaviour specialist in New Zealand and Australia.
All right, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that information with us as well. And so since June, you've been focused a lot more, I think you said, on the behavior consulting side of things. Could you talk a little bit maybe about how that's different than the work that you do the other 2 days a week when you're seeing dogs and cats? Obviously, there are a lot of, one is focused much more, I would think, on the medical model, and the other one you're doing a lot more behavior work. But how are your days different when you're doing those 2 different things?
So the behavior work is very mobile. So I go to people's homes. So I go to their home, we sit down and make a plan for their animal. I send them a questionnaire and also get their medical history before I go. Coming from a veterinary point of view is quite interesting. It means I can be a bit more sort of holistic. For sort of animals with pain is quite an interesting model to work with. So we sit down, make a plan. We might do some training during the session. We might set up a few scenarios. But most of the time, I'm there to give them the tools to then do the behaviour modification and sort of coach them through the situations. There's a lot more talking. I don't have to touch the animals that are fearful or aggressive, which is really nice. In the vet clinic, there's this sort of ethos of, okay, you've got this terrified animal, but you still need to vaccinate it and get it out the door again in 15 minutes, which to me, I always really struggled with, because once I could see the body language that came with fear and anxiety, I was like, I really want to be doing more to this animal. Which makes me different to a lot of other vets, because probably I reach for chemical restraint or send people away and come back later with a sedative on board more readily than others. The get it done sort of attitude has gotten me nearly bitten a few times, and I don't want to do that anymore. Thank you. I don't want to make things worse for the animal. And I think, I very much like being that step before having to, how to describe that? I like being part of the solution, not part of the problem, especially with fear and anxiety and aggression cases. It's been a really interesting, coming from a veterinarian that had no real idea that all of this entire world of behaviour modification existed, and even medications and things. I've been that vet that put a dog on medication for 2 weeks and gone, hasn't worked. Why hasn't it not worked? Well, turns out it takes 4 to 6 weeks for a lot of the medications to kick in for behaviour meds. It's been a really interesting pairing the two, and also moving from the get it done, you only have 15 minutes, to let's take 3 hours to sit down and make a plan for your animal, and I don't have to touch your animal during that time. I'm just going to sit here for a treat at it. Very different.
Do you see the work that you're doing now with behavior, and then given your history as a practicing veterinarian before you started doing a lot of the behavior work, do you see the work that you're doing now potentially being able to impact some of those things that you are talking about struggling with yourself as a veterinarian? So maybe potentially being able to impact how comfortable animals are when they go to see the veterinarian. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an outfit called Fear Free Pets, who specifically work with vets and nurses and technicians to give them some tools in the vet clinic to reduce fear, anxiety, and stress in their patients. I'm a speaker for them here in New Zealand, and I'm really passionate about educating not just the public, but also vets and veterinarians, and how we can recognize it, treat it, and try and reduce it over time, because a lot of the time our patients come back worse each time. And I would love to flip that on the head and start getting animals coming back each time and improving each time and becoming less fearful each time they come to the vet clinic. It's doable. I've seen it happen. But it's just a flip of the mindset of a lot of professionals to start looking at it instead of just ignoring it. And also, that it's something that we can influence and improve.
Good. Well, I think sounds like a really exciting place to be, where you are to have the experience in both, I say both worlds. I mean, you're still in the veterinary world, and the behavior world is not necessarily different or, completely different than that. It doesn't have to be. You're doing both things at once. So it's very, very cool and an exciting place to be. I wonder if you have other ideas, kind of piggybacking off of what you were just talking about how to, I guess, let me ask another question first before I say this and ask this question. Do you find that most veterinarians where you are really open to training and behavior modification as it relates to reducing fear and anxiety in animals as they come into clinics?
I think in New Zealand, we're probably a little bit behind a lot of the other places, but it's coming, partly because I'm here, I hope. There's very few behaviour vets or behaviourists here in New Zealand, so it's possibly going to take a little bit more time. But there was a paper that was done in 2020, I believe, that showed that a lot of dogs that were put down for behaviour problems, young dogs that were put down for behaviour problems, only something like 6% of them had been, I think 6% of them they'd tried behaviour meds, and 11% had been referred to a behaviourist. 11% of dogs showing behaviour problems were referred to a behaviourist. I think that's really sad, and that's something that veterinarians need to be more aware of, is that there is this option to refer to behaviourists. And I see myself, if you imagine your little Venn diagram of veterinarian and trainer or behaviourist, and me being sat in the middle. And I want to sort of pad this out a little bit more in the middle, so there's more people talking to each other, and that these animals can get the help they need. think that answered your question.
Yes. Yeah, that was great. So it sounds like you are in a really cool position to be able to potentially kind of bridge a possible divide between people in the training behavior community and people coming at challenges from a different lens, perhaps. So very cool. So thank you for sharing all of that with us so far. It sounds like you are doing some exciting work and that New Zealand is lucky to have you there as what is your current official title?
Behaviour vet, because I'm not I haven't got a fellowship in that, so I don't have a specialism. We don't use veterinary behaviour. We can use veterinary behaviourists in New Zealand, but I would prefer not to. I'd prefer to keep that title for the specialists, of which we have none here in New Zealand. We have one guy that did it, but I think he may be retired now, which is a shame. We don't have a behaviour specialist in New Zealand.
And do you think New Zealand might one day have one?
I'm currently doing a master's in clinical animal behaviour, and I might look at doing I could happily probably do the fellowship later. We'll see where we go. The membership was quite a lot of work. It was about a year of study to do the membership. But saying that, that's not that much long of a time. I think the fellowship, I need probably 3 years of study to be comfortable to do. Yeah. And I think I need to have written up 300 cases or something like that.
Yep. Sounds like a little bit of work, but I have no doubt that if you want to do it, you will do it, I'm sure. So possibly one day. We will stay tuned for that. Before we move on, we're going to move on to the next topic in just a second here. But before we do, I also kind of wanted to revisit what we were talking about just a minute ago. You were talking about like if there was a Venn diagram and people couldn't see your hands and they can't see mine making the gestures here, but they're little circles and they overlap, and you have maybe like trainer on one side and veterinarian on another, and then you have you kind of there in the middle. And it reminded me about a post that you made recently in the Animal Training Academy about kind of, and I may not remember the specifics exactly right now, but I believe it was about communicating with people who maybe have a different way of looking at something than we do when we want to influence them in some way. And so I don't know, do you have any ideas to share there or just any stories to share there about anything that's been effective for you when you were maybe trying to change the perspective of another a little bit, whether it was another veterinarian or maybe even a human client who you were working with?
So the situation was a public forum that somebody had posted about how your dog should never go through a door in front of you and shouldn't do this, that, and the other, and how it's all about being the alpha in a situation. And I was tagged in it and said, look, this lady, what did she say? Something about that looks a lot like you're talking about dominance theory. This lady, Lucy, would be happy to talk to you about that and how we can improve the relationships with our animals and why that is wrong. So my wonderful friend who dragged me in. And the post was about how do we influence people that have opposite opinions or who are still living in the sort of dominance theory. You have to be the alpha to your dog. You have to eat a cracker from their bowl. And how whether it's worth speaking it out or whether you should be just focusing on the people just that are circulating around you that are closer to being easier to convert their opinion, because there were some very strong opinions on this forum, and there was a conflicting sort of discussion about it is a responsibility to speak up, but also being able to not take it personally when people don't agree with you. But also, one of the conversations I had with one of the members was actually putting your, actually sort of, if you're just circling around the people that are close to you and you're bringing those in, and yes, you're converting people and you're helping people and you're educating people. But if you don't spark out occasionally and put your opinions out there on a forum that actually is the opposite, you won't bring in new people into that pool as well. You'll slowly convert more people around you. But one of the people I follow has said that was how she first learned about clicker training, was on somebody suggesting it on a forum that she'd never heard of it on before, and then going down the rabbit warren of positive reinforcement training. So a combination, like you don't want to spend all your time talking and arguing with people that have an opposite opinion, that don't want to budge. But just because you're putting your opinion out there doesn't mean that other people won't read it and go, that looks interesting. I might go and follow this chick, and then start being one of those people that are circulating around you that are learning. So, yeah, it was a really interesting conversation we had on ATA about that, and it was a really it was good for me to not realize that I could spend all my time out here, like right out in the left field, arguing with people. And helping some people find their way to me, but it's also not somewhere I want to spend all of my time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was not remembering all of that. Exactly right. I forgot that it was on social media and that it was about such an, what sounds like such an extreme difference in viewpoint than the one that you held. And that makes things extra, both of those things, I think, make things extra tricky sometimes. But I think it's good when we're able to do it in a way that works for us. And I know that Ryan Cartledge in ATA is a big fan of using the crucial conversations model when engaging in, these discussions with folks when stakes run high and people have very different kind of opinions about things, which is a great model to use. But even in addition to those extreme differences in viewpoints and social media, which is a tricky kind of thing for sure, it just makes me think generally about the importance of talking to people who see things differently than we do sometimes, and maybe it's because we want to we think we have information to share with them that's going to be really important and helpful for them. But also maybe sometimes we might learn something from somebody who has a different point of view, even if it's completely different than ours. And even if it doesn't change our point of view, there's still opportunity for learning there sometimes. So good for you for working through that and sharing it publicly with all of us in ATA and now here as well. So thank you. So let's move along and talk a little bit more specifically about training now. Could you tell us about a recent training-related challenge that you have experienced and kind of how you worked through the challenge and some things that you learned from it?
Yeah, so I've got lots of interesting examples, but the one that comes to mind is that I took on a horse not long ago that had essentially we were her last chance, and I took her on because she was sort of being quite aggressive and biting when you went to groom her or to do up her girth. So she'd had a history of pretty severe gastric ulcers, stomach ulcers, and she had learnt this behaviour while being quite painful to get people to essentially back off and not touch her because she was very painful. And also learnt that, she could push people off her food. So I've taken her on and One of the things we've been working through is the girthing. So first off, I made sure there was no more ulcers, that that was all sorted and that she wasn't in pain. And then we've been working through the learned behaviour and the girthing issues. So I started using a start button and doing asking whether I could put the saddle on first, and then whether I could do up the girth. I managed to poison it at one point, the challenge was actually that she went, actually, no, I'm still not comfortable with this, even if you are asking my opinion about it. And so I had to, I'm going back to completely at liberty and being a lot more careful about how I ask her opinion. And it was interesting. I asked her, my start button is attached to the hand. So I offered my hand and she went to bite my hand. And I was like, oh, God, I've really messed up my start button here. So that's been a really interesting exercise. And also coming from a riding sort of thing is that actually horses don't really have opinion. Like, you're not allowed to have the horses. They're not allowed to have an opinion about it. You just, this is what we do. We get up and we go. And I've been sort of working through that in my mind as well. Is that actually, I actually really want my horses to have opinions. And I really, if she isn't comfortable with that, we'll find other options. So that's been a really great exercise for me, coming from actually working with a horse that had gotten quite extreme in her levels of aggression about the saddle and the girth, to how being able to ask her opinion and also working through start buttons and things. It's been really interesting.
So did you say that you, and I have definitely done this myself, not with a horse, but did you say that you actually, quote, poisoned the start button? And could you talk a little bit about what that looked like?
So I started using the start button to go, are you okay for the girth to be done up? And then I realized that she was still saying yes, but she wasn't, her body language was not comfortable. And I hadn't been listening to that as well as I should, because she was like, I really still want the food. And then the day that she actually went, no, I'm going to change the start button to an actual, I'm going to bite your hand. And I was like, whoops. I had not been listening to her as well as I should have, because I was just like, start button, cool, touch my hand, I will do up your girth. So that's what I'm working through at the moment is I'm not sure whether I'm going to change the start button and start again, or whether I'm going to suggest, or keep going with the hand touch and like break it back down to the little levels and still use it. I'm sort of probably going to try de-poisoning my cue because I quite like it. It's quite a clear touch to my hand. But I'm going to take it back to an open space, and so she's not tied up, which is one of the things is that, you get up when you're tied up, and I'm worried that I'm actually not seeing some body language in there. That's where I'm going with it.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I can appreciate also that it's potentially a bit of a vulnerable thing to do, to talk about poisoning a start button that you created in a training process. But like I said, I have certainly done it with my own dogs, working with them. And I would guess that some of the listeners have potentially done it as well. And I think it's a really, really important thing to talk about, because as we try to introduce, choice and control for the animals who we're working with, a lot of times for me, I just get so excited about, I have my focus on the end goal and I get so excited. And sometimes that can cause me to push through and maybe ignore some of those more subtle signals like you're talking about. You're nodding, so I think that might resonate with you a bit as well.
Very much so. And it's taken I being able to take that experience and go to clients that are working through things like teaching their dog to wear a harness. It gives me a little bit more of an experience to go, cool. make sure that the dog's body language is comfortable while you're doing this, and you stay at this level until you can move on. So that's been a really valuable experience, I would say. And it's funny how you might know the theory, but until you're actually doing it in practice, it's something that you learn as you go. We have to. Oftentimes, I feel like I have to actually do something and train something before I'm able to completely show it to clients. And yeah, it's a good experience.
Well, I will be really interested to follow along with that and see if you decide to keep that hand touch as the start button, or if you decide to switch to a different one. And either way, I'll be excited to follow along and see how that goes as you move forward in training this. You mentioned something that makes me kind of want to ping back to the things that we were talking about a little bit at the beginning of the show, back to your veterinary lens a little bit, that medical lens a little bit. You mentioned that with this horse, she had gastric ulcers in the past, and they were really painful, and she had some kind of medical things, I think, going on with her. And that makes me wonder, I don't know, you might have said this in the beginning, I'm not sure, but of the animals who you're working with who have behavior challenges, do a lot of them also have medical challenges going on, do you find?
Absolutely. So something they did, I'm quoting something that I'm not 100% sure on, but I think somebody said that 80% of aggression cases have pain involved. Some sort of pain, whether it was acute or chronic. So that's a really interesting thing from a veterinary point of view. Is I will often go with cases that have bitten somebody, go to the vet clinic, and sometimes they go, "But it's so traumatic," and I'm like, "I understand, believe me." But you need to go to the vet clinic. We need to rule out pain. We need to discuss whether or not there's something else underlying before we start. Which is why I often work with referrals from veterinarians. And I also work with the medical history, because I feel it's really relevant to the behaviours that I see, especially in aggression and anxiety cases. So there's often cases that I see have some sort of medical component as well. Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't think to ask that when we were talking about all of this at the beginning, and so I am kind of bouncing around here a little bit. But yeah, I have heard the same thing about there being such a high percentage of animals who are experiencing or behaving in ways that are aggressive and having some underlying medical issue happening a lot of the time. So you're also in a really you're also really well positioned, I guess, that you do get a lot of referrals from veterinarians, and that you then are also able to refer back to veterinarians. And I sure be really specific and objective in the things that you're sharing with them to help get to the bottom of some of these medical issues for the folks who you're working with.
For sure, being able to, having the understanding of analgesics and pain relief, and also the behavior modification drugs as well, like being able to help them find the right fit for their animal has been really key. Sometimes it's there's a definite chronic pain issue going on here. And we need to definitely work on that, but also starting the behaviour modification stuff. So it's been really interesting from that point of view. Yeah.
Well, your clients and New Zealand are very lucky to have you working with them in these ways, I think. So could you now, let's hop back now to training again, and could you share with us a story about a behavior, either a behavior you have trained or just a training situation in general that you're proud of and or that you found reinforcing? So it could be one or both of those things.
I've got quite a few cases that because I'm so focused on the client being able to do the behavior modification and things themselves, I find it really reinforcing when a client comes back to me and goes, look at this dog in its harness. You taught me how to do this, but now the dog literally comes running up and puts its own harness on. How awesome is that? Trying to think of a specific. There's a dog that couldn't be touched in the vet clinic at all, completely would alligator roll and snap and run away because she was so terrified. And I worked with these clients with a cooperative care, putting the dog's muzzle on the lady's hand. So it was interesting when I first went there, and I said to them, do you think she's comfortable with you guys touching her everywhere? And they were like, yeah, look, we can touch her all over her head and her paws, and this dog's rigid and lip licking, and it's quite uncomfortable. And I was like, cool, let's unpack this. Talked about the body language, talked about how to me the dog wasn't comfortable. And then we started just trying to counter condition the handling, realized that it still wasn't working as well as we'd like. So then we added in a nose, what's it called? Not a nose touch, but a chin to her hand, so that she had a way of telling them when she was uncomfortable by lifting her head. So then we were able to build up to knee touching her all over, which was amazing, actually, to be honest, because I couldn't go anywhere near her the first visit. We also were muzzle training her at the same time. So she'd hold the muzzle out, she'd put her nose in it, and it became the double whammy of the chin rest and the muzzle being put on. And then she was eventually able to be vaccinated at home, and then also able to be desexed is the final thing, but I'm not sure whether they've gotten that yet. Yeah. So it was quite a lot. And these clients were coming back to me and saying, look, we've done this, and now we've got to this milestone, and then we got to this milestone. And it was really reinforcing to me, even though I wasn't actually doing the training myself, because, of course, they were doing it, but really reinforcing to see the progress that they were going through. And, yeah, when they vaccinated her at home, that was like a big cheer moment, because she was terrified of being handled, let alone injected. So, yeah, it's really cool.
That is really cool. And it sounds like working with human clients is reinforcing to you. And also it sounds to me from this story and from the example you gave about your horse that training things cooperatively with animals is really reinforcing for you. Would you agree with that, with those things?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's becoming more and more of what I do every animal I work with.
That's wonderful. Do you find that a lot of your clients are they looking for that to begin with, or to work on cooperative care issues with their animals, or is that something that you're able to start kind of working in with them as you meet them to work on other things?
I think a bit of both. A lot of them are unaware that it is an option. And that, a lot of them are unaware that it is an option, or that it's necessary for them to make the progress that they need. Those people were like, we just want her to be able to go to the vet clinic, have an injection, and be spayed. And I say, okay, well, there's a lot of layers in there that we need to unpack before we're going to get there. So, yeah, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems, I think that for me, it seems a lot of times it's something that I try to add on with folks, but it's wonderful when people come right out of the gate looking for a more kind of cooperative relationship. So good. I'm glad you're seeing both of those things. So if folks want to work with you, how would they do that? How could people reach out to you and contact you about your business and your services?
My website is Vet Behaviour, which is IOUR.co.nz. And then you can get me at lucy@vetbehaviour.co.nz. I've got a Facebook page, which is Veterinary Behaviour Services NZ. Come and reach out and come and work with me.
Awesome. Well, I hope people will hear this and, I definitely hope people will hear this. I think some people will hear this, and I hope those who do will reach out to you and come and work with you and utilize your wonderful services. So thank you so much for sharing everything that you have shared with us today. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, letting us all get to know you better. And so from myself and on behalf of everybody listening today, thank you so much, Lucy.
You're welcome. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Shelley.
We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.